Test Drive. And it's a chance for you all to experience one of our courses exactly as our students do. And I'm especially pleased to introduce tonight's instructor, Matt Pepsel. He's a Marine Corps veteran. He's currently vice president at the Predictive Index, where he's known as, I love this title, the Godfather of Talent Optimization. And he's also the author of a book, Expand the Circle, Enlighten Leadership for Our New World of Work. And he's one of our outstanding MSL faculty members. So I'm just so happy that Matt's here. I'm happy that you are all here. If you're comfortable having your cameras on, please do. It's always helpful for us to feel a little more connected. And with that, I'm going to say, Dr. Pepsel, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Ellen. It's great to see everybody tonight. We're going to be talking all about self-awareness and leadership, one of my absolute favorite topics. It's something I wish I had when I started leading people a long time ago. It would have been a lot easier on them, that's for sure. But we're going to cover quite a bit of ground in just a little bit of time. So I wonder if you might head over to the chat. Just let me know where you're dialing in from. And today is also National Donut Day. So I'd love to know, what's your favorite donut? I didn't know there was such a national day. And I'm going to have to go with Boston cream. That's going to be one of my favorite. A little on brand, I think, perhaps. But yeah, let's head on over to the chat there. Yep. Oh, it's got blueberry. That's a good one, too. Ooh, I like that one. Portland, Oregon. Very nice. Yep, cider donut. Timed it right this time of year. Yeah, Boston, another Boston cream. See, can't go wrong, Betsy. We got it. Glazed. Yeah, it's classic, classic. Walpole, apple cider. A lot of apple cider. See, I like that a lot. Gluten-free, very good. Awesome. So yeah, so we'll be using the chat a little bit today to for some of our interactions, and then as we get a little further into it as well, I like to say that leadership is a full contact sport. So we'd love for you to maybe use your raise hand function inside of Zoom, come off mute. We're going to have plenty of opportunities for that type of interaction as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, get us into the slide presentation here real quick. All right, and you can see my title. Looks good. All right, here we go. So yeah, so welcome again to this test drive for the self-aware leader. Very excited to be having you today. And it was Socrates originally who had said the unexamined life isn't worth living. I'm sure you've heard that maxim. But when we start to think about examining life like that, what does that actually mean? And with all due respect to Socrates, what I'd like to add to that is my own quote, which is that the unexamined leader, therefore, isn't worth following. And I think that a lot of times when we're thinking about leadership and we're thinking about what is it that's happening, it's an inner game as much. And leaders, unfortunately, self-awareness is often lacking. So immediately we're hit with this question, which is self-awareness, what the heck is it? So what I'd love to do is go back to the chat that we've been using to share all of our donut love. And I want to know what the term self-awareness, when you hear that, what comes to mind for you? See, there was a method to the donut chat. When you hear the term self-awareness, what comes to mind? Yeah. Ethan's got reflection. Yep, definitely. Understanding who you are and how others perceive you. And Patrick has a great point, and they're not always the same, are they? Sometimes we have a different understanding of ourselves versus how others see us. What else you got? Intention, intentionality. Very nice. Patrick got a thumbs up. Look at that. Very good. How about one more? Knowledge of self. Yeah. And a willingness to study it. I think that's a really great point, Kevin. It's not something that we can just do for other people. We must do that for ourselves, obviously, when we talk about self-awareness. Honest reflection, Sabrina says, very true. And sometimes honesty is not that easy to come by when we have to look at those parts of ourselves that are not all that flattering. Courageous, love that as well. Health and mind virtue, yeah. Understanding self as a pathway almost to understanding others. These are all really great responses. Yeah, so self-awareness, and you can tell in the breadth of your responses, it's a wide-ranging topic. There's a lot that goes into it. And if you're One of the students in my course, it's a 14-week course, they would agree with you. There's a lot that goes into it. And we have a lot of great fun thinking about and reflecting on it. We'll have some of that practice today as well. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about self-awareness fundamentals. I want you to experience the way that I share with my students how we start to broach the topic of self-awareness using some of the academic resources, but also in a way that connects to the application of the concept of self-awareness, because we do our leadership in the real world. So it's great to come into a classroom environment and to study it and to see what great thinkers have said about it, but we have to be able to convert that into action. We have to change the way that we show up for others so that we can drive performance and engagement, well-being, and all the things we want for our teams, for example. I'll lead us through a quick reflection exercise, and we'll have a little bit of a debrief and discussion. So we'll be tapping into some of that courage, Sabrina, that you had shared with us, and we'll have just a little bit of light conversation about that. Then I want to introduce you to an exercise that my students absolutely love. I don't know if that's entirely true. I love it, and therefore maybe they should too, which is called Leader Lens. So we're going to take a look at Leader Lens. And then toward the end, I'll give you my views of what it takes to reach the next level when it comes to our leadership. And then I'd love you to be able to walk away with some clear takeaways and next actions from our time together. So that's how we're going to approach the session. Now, when it comes to self-awareness fundamentals, I'll just do a little bit of light lecture just to give us some common language and maybe some common frameworks to look at, and then we'll be able to build on that from there. So if we take a look at the definition of self-awareness by one of the titans, if you will, from the emotional intelligence space, Daniel Goleman, he says that self-awareness means having a deep understanding of one's emotions, strengths, weaknesses, needs, and drives, and that's only a partial list. He goes on to talk a lot about the various aspects of emotional intelligence that build on top of self-awareness, that get into things like self-regulation and awareness of others, as you brought up in the chat, for example. But think about this notion of having this deep understanding. So it's not a superficial understanding at all. Yet, unfortunately, what we find in our day-to-day work, sometimes we're constantly ticking off the to-do lists and trying to ship projects and all these kinds of things and barely have time to stop and think about what it is that's really going on inside of us. And sometimes we might find that we get short with a coworker, or maybe we're frustrated with one of our direct reports, and that's because we haven't necessarily taken the time to process the emotions that are happening. A lot of times, too, when we see something like a performance review, we may immediately say, let's skip all that nice stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm great. Okay, where's the thing? What did they say about me? Like, what is it that they ding me on here? And so sometimes we over-index or overemphasize our weaknesses, bypassing some of our most natural strengths. And over the course of our career, that can cause a lot of different challenges, for example. So I love this definition from Goleman about how holistic it is, emotions, strengths, etc., but also having that deep, deep understanding of that. Now, there is one major challenge, and you can see it here on the screen. And what we find is that executives tend to undervalue self-awareness when making promotion decisions, for example. Now, when you think about this notion, a lot of times when we're thinking about getting the job done, when we think about how to scale somebody's expertise, those things tend to take center stage. But whether that leader, for example, is demonstrating self-awareness and how that's showing up in terms of their interactions with others can become part of a challenge. So, what might be the consequences when we promote leaders, for example, who have low self-awareness? Now, at this point, you can either use the chat, give me an example of some of the consequences, whether you've seen them or maybe you've only heard of them, but without naming names, of course. But what are some of the consequences if we continue to promote leaders, for example, who have low self-awareness? I'm eyeing the chat and I'm trying to eye the cameras all at the same time in case somebody uses their raise hand function, wants to come off mute and let us know what they think. Poor communication skills, great example. Too much self-interest, one of my absolute favorite terms. Could promote someone who is toxic. Yeah, a lot of times we find that, let's say, for example, we have a sales professional, great sales performance, but don't acknowledge the fact that they're burning through the organization in terms of getting their deals over the line. You know, that can be a challenge for sure. Treating team members poorly. And so we know that there's always consequences to treating team members poorly, for example. In some job markets, that could lead to turnover. In a job market like ours today, in most industries, We're seeing a lot of folks that are not necessarily all that interested in leaving, but they can withdraw that sort of discretionary effort, their level of engagement. They might then be short with team members, and all of a sudden we have a cultural kind of a downward spiral. That can happen too. Promoting someone who excels at tasks at their job but isn't equipped to help others grow. We do this all the time. All the time. We take our star programmers and sales performers, and then we just say, I got an amazing idea. Let's promote them and not give them any leadership training. Wouldn't that be a great idea? Unfortunately, we continue to make that mistake generation after generation. And poor team performance, says Kevin, and that's very, very true. Self-awareness leads directly to the interaction we have with others and how we show up for them, and also therefore has this trickle-down effect on team performance. So those are great responses. Thank you for that. There's also another key connection if we start looking at the positive upside around authenticity. And what we find is that in terms of authentic leadership, this is what creates magnetism, if you will. It draws others toward us. This is when we start to lean into our strengths, our natural strengths, and it creates something also known as resonant leadership, where we have these deep relationships and our level of commitment to the leader, to the team, to the organization, to the mission. All these things go up when we demonstrate an authentic form of leadership. So in this case, Kevin Cashman comes through and talks about authenticity, and he and his co-author had defined it as the continuous process of building self-awareness of our whole person. And I want to break this down a little bit here. When you think about this notion of a continuous process, the reason that this is really important when it comes to self-awareness is because not only are our environments changing, our organizations are changing. For example, right now we're seeing in the consulting work that I do with companies, everything from generational conflict to struggles with autonomy and flexibility that workers want, but employers don't always want to give. Still haven't figured out how to do remote and hybrid work super well, if you really think about it. And then obviously generative AI is coming in and changing a lot of jobs. It's creating a lot of fear and opportunity. So the entire environment is changing, but we ourselves are changing too. As we go through and we have different life events, or we just continue the process of living our lives, then we are also evolving as well. And that's why we describe this as a continuous process. It never really ends. It's also very holistic in the sense of our whole person. So when you think about your values, you think about some of the emotional, your belief systems, these sorts of things, how are they actually interacting with the world? So for example, if I value promptness and there's somebody on my team who's chronically late but a high performer, what do? I want to call them on it, but I don't want to destroy the relationship and I don't want them to, you run into these crux. Well, that's where we start to see the whole person being brought to bear. And then finally, not even just talking about being transparent with others about our whole person, but that includes both strengths and limitations. I know for many years I tried not to put up any sort of errors. I didn't want any chinks in the armor when I looked at my team because I thought they wouldn't respect me. But later, after I went through a long period of work and life, I finally broke down basically and said, I'm having some struggles here. I need you to pick up some slack for me because I'm working on some other project. And I thought that it would diminish my leadership. It actually drew them closer to me because I gave them permission in my willingness to be vulnerable and talk about just things that I'm not really good at. I'm not the most detail-oriented person, for example. Then all of a sudden, I was delightfully surprised to see that my limitations, not only could I accept them, but it would actually create and reduce some of the barriers, for example, of people being drawn to me and being willing to be committed to what I was putting out there. So that was authenticity that I had to learn kind of the hard way, but it's absolutely a part of what Kevin Cashman's talking about here. And I know Mary Ellen had shared a resource for you to read ahead of time. So you got to read from Jennifer Porter about her perception here about, in this case, reflection. And I love this quote because I found it absolutely to be true. And she talks about how reflection requires leaders to do a number of things they typically don't like to do. Slow down. So it's impossible to develop that deep self-awareness when we're always running. And that's so, leaders don't like to slow down, but if we're going to get to that level of self-awareness, we must do exactly that. How about adopting a mindset of not knowing? Again, something leaders are expected, at least in their minds, to have the answers for everything. And that's, part of their competence. Now, all of a sudden, to say, I don't know why I reacted that way in that meeting, for example. And curiosity, instead of judging yourself saying, oh, it's going to cost me the promotion, saying curiosity, what was going on? What happened in my mind that led me to react in that way, for example. So not always comfortable. And that's why leaders tend not to do it, but we know we must do it. And then finally, tolerating messiness and inefficiency. It's not the same as learning a skill, or it doesn't have the same tangible, immediate effect that some of the other types of skills development have. And then finally, though, the biggest one, taking personal responsibility. A lot of times we externalize our leadership and we say what's happening in the organization, on the team, performance. We want to look anywhere but inside. And what we find is that if we're going to elevate our leadership, if we're going to show up at our best for others to help them and grow and develop them, which is one of the primary charges of leaders, then we're going to have to take personal responsibility for our own self-awareness. So those were some of the examples from the readings that we tend to cover in the classes, and we do a nice job of connecting these then to real world situations. And we're going to do a little bit of that right now. We're going to talk about a reflection exercise here. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to work on this reflection. We're going to actually kind of walk the talk, as they say, and we're going to do a quick reflection here. So let me give you that prompt. For the next 4 minutes, what I'd like you to do, think about a time in your life when you learned something surprising about yourself. You know, and you can see on the screen a couple of different examples, maybe a strength that you didn't know you had. And you don't have to think about just work, although that's where we tend to think about leadership. It could be sports, could be school, could be a volunteer program, could be anything you'd like. But the two reflection questions I'd like you to think about, what specifically did you discover? And how has that discovery shaped your behavior, your relationships, or your mindset? So now I've talked so much that you get 3.5 minutes. 3.5 minutes. Just take some notes right next to your desktop there. And then I'll bring us back together. Got 1 more minute to finish up your thoughts. All right. Thanks so much for doing that work. Now I would love to have a volunteer to come off mute, have a little conversation with me, and tell me a little bit about your reflection. What showed up for you when we had this chance to think back to a time when something surprised you? Oops.
Matt, I can start if uh if no one else wants to go.
Yeah, please.
Um, so in my personal life, when faced with stress, I revert inwards totally. Like I need a couple hours to get out of uh a funk, what I'm feeling, whatever, or like, time to get my way towards coolness, right? Obviously that can't fly at work, but I've been really surprised that at work I tend to not shy away from seeking out problems, or I don't shy from conflict. So it has made me realize that maybe this is something that I can incorporate in my personal life too.
I love that. I love that. And so tell me a little bit about the surprise moment again. Like, what was it going on before you had that revelation?
Well, I think before that it was like, well, I can keep it inwards and start and it can fester, right? Where I won't share my solution. I'll just keep this inward and not kind of like the dysfunction that can come from not facing something head on.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what happens internally then is you might end up driving home and you're thinking, oh, why didn't you say something? You go through that inner turmoil. Meanwhile, the organization, your team doesn't benefit from what you might have had to share, right? And I think that a lot of times what we do work in our course as well is we use different types of assessments to help us develop higher levels of self-awareness. And so, as an example, what we might find is that somebody might be a little bit more introverted versus extroverted, or they might have other different types of personality traits. Well, what's really important about that is not just that you have awareness about your own natural style, but you understand how that style shows up, for example, in different aspects of your life or your work. So, for example, sometimes we find that highly extroverted people will tend to dominate the meeting. Well, especially under certain like competitive situations. So, during a brainstorm, for example. And that's where if you have low self-awareness, you don't realize, and it's not intentional or nefarious, but you don't realize that your own natural instinct might be steamrolling your team members, right? And creating a lack of trust and preventing some of the best ideas from coming to the surface. So some of those different tools can help us accelerate some of the process of self-awareness. But Anna, it sounds like in that example, you had that surprise and pleasant surprise in that way. So tell me a little bit about what was different as a result since then.
Just feeling more comfortable bringing even like I went to a presentation today for work, and prior to kind of this revelation I would never share with a bigger group, and feeling comfortable with the ideas that I had and not so self-critical and sharing it with other people.
And now you're showing up, you're feeling more comfortable, you're feeling more confident. And I'm sure, you've had opportunities to share and people will take that idea and say, I'm really glad you spoke up. The other thing that sometimes we don't appreciate is your willingness to speak up might encourage someone else who might have been hesitant, right?
Mhm.
So this is what leadership looks like. And what you're describing is what leadership looks like. And I think a lot of times we hear the word leadership and we think about at the highest level, like, oh, this is for CEOs or whatever. No, everybody has an opportunity to be a leader, right? We need leaders at every level. And I think we need to take some of the stigma out of that word as if it's, oh, I'm not a leader. I've had people literally who manage lots and lots of people say, oh, I'm a manager, but I wouldn't call myself a leader. Like, what is it about that word that can kind of be off-putting in some ways? It feels like, is it the braggadocio? Is it whatever it might be? Instead, I want us all to embrace the leader and recognize that anytime you're encouraging others to contribute their collective energies toward a common goal, that's leadership. I mean, and we need that I don't care if you're an individual contributor all the way up to the CEO or anything else. Like that's what we need. So Anna, in that moment, your willingness to, or your being surprised delightfully and saying, you know what, I'm going to lean into this. I'm going to be more confident. That's an act of leadership because it'll help others feel more at ease in doing the same. And you never know who's going to have that critical observation or that idea that really takes the entire team to the next level, right? So we have to recognize that as leaders, we create the environment for others' excellence. And so that doesn't happen if all of a sudden everyone's going to keep to themselves and say, well, unless you have a VP or higher title, then your ideas really don't matter here. Oh, no, that's terrible. We can't have that. And some of you have worked in organizations that are exactly like that. It's not good, not good. Thank you, Anna, for getting us started. How about another volunteer? Something else who would like to share from your reflection, something that surprised you, something you discovered about yourself. Patrick, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I can go. So I had an epiphany when I moved in with my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife. So this wasn't too bad of an epiphany, but she made it, she brought to my attention that while I had like a really high level of attention to detail at work and like when I was in school and things like that, I was not bringing that same energy in my personal life necessarily. I think space cadet was the term she used. And I think, I try to use empathy as like a guiding principle for me, and her bringing that up made me realize that I was putting an undue burden on her to do things like refill the dog's medication and make sure that, certain things that I previously hadn't even thought of were getting done, and kind of prompted me to actively like carve out time to think about that stuff because it wasn't coming naturally to me necessarily, but was something that I had to improve and develop to be a better partner. Um, and so that was a good wake up call. And I think like creating the space to it led to the marriage part and from being girlfriends. So yeah, that's one that sticks out. And I think just became a big focus of my personal development, and also realized that there was opportunity to, you know, create space for anticipating problems at work too, and kind of taking some of that practice from my personal life and incorporating it in professional life as well.
It's amazing how those lessons can really play out in both domains, both in our relationships at home or at work. And in fact, there's been a lot of research that talks about the way we approach our work often is defined by early family relationships and situations. So there's a lot of dynamics there. But I love that example where it's almost as if your now wife is saying, "Do you even realize that you do this thing?" You're like, I had no idea. It didn't even register. And that's an example. It's such a beautiful example of low self-awareness, but saying, now that I'm aware, I will do something differently, right? There's a total difference between that and somebody goes, "Oh yeah, I know. I just don't care." You're like, "Oh, okay." So you have awareness. That's a different part of the textbook. We'll have
Yeah.
to flip to there. So I love that a lot. So, and it sounds like you were able to parlay some of those that discovery, be perhaps a little more attentive or something as you approach your work as well.
Yeah, I think to your earlier point, that at a time I was working at a startup that was growing really fast, and it was very much like whack-a-mole, just like go and do the next thing and solve the next problem. But it kind of prompted me to set aside time to think about the three steps ahead and what might pop up so that we can try to nip it in the bud or kind of take a different path at the time to avoid it. Like, just like thinking, oh, we're going to be out of the dog's medication next week. We should refill it now instead of the day before it runs out, kind of deal.
Yeah, so true. I love that. And it's one of those things where a lot of times when we discover something that we didn't know before, we're asking ourselves, what else don't I know? What
Hmm.
else am I not noticing? And that's a really great primer for us to actively and proactively seek feedback. And so we have an entire module where we'll talk very specifically about feedback. And they've really done research to say that there's a couple of different types of triggers that will really sort of make us more defensive when it comes to getting feedback. And that can include relationship triggers, like you had described, and it's almost as if you're saying, "Well, this coming from you, like, oh my gosh, that can be really damaging." Or truth triggers, where we say, like, "I don't necessarily agree with that. I think I'm perfectly attentive to these things." Or there could be identity triggers when something is like, it sort of flies in the face of who you think you actually deeply are. Those can be difficult things, but they're necessary. So, we're using some examples that if left unattended, they can create real problems in relationships and they can become derailers, career derailers for otherwise promising executives and leaders. And if it's true for them, it's true for all of us. So I really appreciate the willingness to share some of those reflections.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go back to resume my share because we've still got work to do. We're going to get after it here. So these personal discoveries and this type of reflection is critically important for us. And we've been focusing a little bit on when we're the ones that have The surprises, something developed that we hadn't really anticipated, and how we've involved that or it's changed the way that we've approached our work or our behavior. But what I want to do now is shift us to another type of exercise, which is called leader lens. I'm going to share with you a scenario. I'm going to take a chance. I'll just read it out loud for us. But we're going to use this scenario to try to apply some of the principles around self-awareness. So in this case, here's the situation. A retail store is preparing for the holiday rush. And during the daily huddle, Jordan, an assistant manager, enthusiastically shares a new inventory system they've designed. When a floor associate mentions concerns about learning it during their busiest week, Jordan says, "It's super simple. You'll get it in 5 minutes." Jordan then spends 20 minutes explaining the color-coded spreadsheet system with multiple tabs. So Maya, who feels overwhelmed and anxious, says, "This isn't simple at all. I'm already working overtime. Does Jordan not see my face right now?" And Chris is resentful because he says, "Jordan asked for input last week and I gave it, yet none of my suggestions are in here. Why bother asking?" Have we all been one of these people at some time? Yeah, we have. So I'm going to need a volunteer because here comes the most important point. You are the leader. Okay, so this is us applying what we know about self-awareness and no wrong answers here, of course. We're looking at some tips to try to help in this situation. So you're the store manager, and I have two questions for you. One, how would you help Jordan recognize the gap between their intentions and their impact on the team? So that's one, is now you have to have a one-on-one with Jordan. What might you do to help identify that gap? But then beyond that, what sort of practices could you instill, for example, that are going to help all team members boost their self-awareness? So who'd like to come off mute and just give me an example? Again, no wrong answers. I'm trying to give you an example about how we, in our course room, start applying some of the lessons that we have so we can think a little bit more deeply about what we might do differently on Monday morning if we're in a similar situation. I'm pulling up all my cameras here. Who'd like to come off mute? Betsy, you're smiling. Can I call on you? That's what you get for smiling, Betsy.
Sure. I'm just trying to think of how I would respond to this. I think I've known, even with myself, doing some self-reflection and self-awareness, that sometimes when you have a project and you get so narrow-minded and excited to roll something out that you just want to get it out and you don't take a step back to look at the big picture of, is this the best time to do it at the height of the holiday rush? Do I want to implement this brand new system? I know my brain works a certain way, it might not work for another person. So,
Yeah.
how can I identify needs and awareness and people that may need more time and learning styles too? I think that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration and account. So that's where when I'm thinking and how I would necessarily maybe coach someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hear other people's thoughts, but
I think you've nailed it. I think you've nailed it. I love the fact that you're doing something that I recommend to all leaders in a similar situation, which is always start by probing awareness.
Hmm.
So we shouldn't assume that Jordan is a nefarious type who's trying to wreak havoc on my team, may be completely doing it out of just, their own interest in saying like an organized spreadsheet is of course the way you're going to do everything. I have so many spreadsheets in my life to manage my personal life. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
But I think that probing for that awareness is a great place to start. I think another thing you said, Betsy, that was really, really important is saying like you made it related. I know there have been times when I've been so focused on the project. So all of a sudden you make it a little safer for someone to say, "Oh, okay, so this isn't like you coming at me, right? You're letting me say that it's happened to you as well. So this could be one of those times." So that can sort of put them a little bit at ease. Another thing is if we approach feedback as a conversation and we're going to basically not just say, "Look, you better fix this and I can't have you doing this," but we can ask questions. And so we can say, for example, "I noticed that when you were sharing, for example, your new spreadsheet, can you tell me what Maya's reaction was or what Chris was, might have been thinking?" And if they're like, I don't really know. I was so focused on the thing. You're like, "Okay, well, let me share with you what I saw." And all of a sudden now we're having a teachable moment. That's how that coaching can happen. So they don't feel like they're being attacked because the intention behind what they're probably trying to do to help us get organized and have a successful holiday season is noble. However, the execution needs some attention because we're kind of impinging on our team members and we can't be having that. So That's great. How was your experience with the leader lens, Betsy?
It was great. Everyone should jump in.
Yeah, let's do one more. Betsy, we can popcorn it. Who would you like to call on?
Oh my goodness, don't make me do
Oh, I
that.
won't make you do that. So, who's going to protect Betsy from the popcorn? Who'd like to give me one more quick example, and then I'll move us forward, I promise.
You mean for this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah, please, Amy.
Sure. Yeah. I
Thank
mean,
you.
first of all, I mean, always assume good intent, right? So it's coming from a good place. And I would probably put up maybe like, great idea. Let's press pause on it. Let's hold this for another time. In the meantime, let's get some feedback from other team members, and maybe, we'll have like a little like steering committee or something. And I would also throw it on myself to be like, wow, this is amazing, but I'm a little overwhelmed by this color coding system, and put it on me as the leader to then make it okay that other people don't get it either.
Nice.
That's probably how I would approach it.
That's great. A great way to diffuse the situation a little bit. Hey, I could use a little more time with this. Now, all of a sudden, the team, Jordan's not going to go back and say to Maya and Chris, "You all submarine my idea. What the heck?" So you've taken
Right.
the
Good idea, just not right now.
Yeah, exactly. So resetting expectations as well. And I love the point that you made too, Amy. Always assume good intent, right? So unless we see a pattern of behavior, then I think a lot of times the store manager might be so frustrated and short saying, oh man, I can't be having this right now. And then they act brusquely, for example, with Jordan. And now what happens to Jordan? All of a sudden, all the energy, the positive, I was so excited about my idea. Now I just won't bring up ideas anymore because you just squashed me in the moment. So we don't want to have that happen either. So you can see how heavy the mantle is for a leader to say, I'm managing myself and my own, sanity and patience, as well as Jordan and Maya and Chris and the long term. There's a lot to it, which is why we
Right.
have to study leadership. It's a craft that we have to study and practice. And this is where reflection becomes important. So hopefully, as the leader, when you're driving home and you're thinking about the interaction with Jordan, the one-on-one, what went well? What could I do differently next time, for example? That's where, your own reflection doesn't end in your own self-awareness about, how they react. And it's constantly a learning process. Very nice. Well, I want to briefly share with you a view that I have around next level leadership. I've been in the game a long time, and I just wanted to share a kind of a framework that I have found helpful. So one example here is when we talk about these different leadership levels. And certainly in the beginning of my work, when I was in the military, we had a lot of transactional focused leadership. And this is when you think about the hard side, the nuts and the bolts, productivity, the different types of results we put up, and it's about doing the job, right? Leadership that gets the job done is what gets rewarded. And that's kind of the entry level, the basic level of how we might think about leadership. As we continue to progress, though, we start to realize that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to enhance the lives of others in terms of things like their engagement, their growth, their sense of belonging. And what we're seeing is with generational differences, some of these things that weren't that important, to be honest with you, when it came to my generation, Generation X, we didn't necessarily look for belonging at work. We had other places for that. That's fundamentally changed. Now we have to be able to provide belonging. And there's a lot of studies right now about, do you have a best friend at work? Never would have happened when I was coming up in the ranks, but it's definitely part of the research now for a lot of good reasons. So as you continue to climb the ladder, you've gone from transactional to team-oriented, but there is a higher level still, which is this transformational leadership model. And when you think about what we accomplish at Woods, when you start looking at these principles that we have about how to have a much more holistic approach, something that I talk about with leadership is we have to find a way to integrate performance and people and purpose. And that's what we can do when we have transformational leadership. So I won't go into details of this stuff, but I just feel very encouraged that there is this progressive level that you can get to. But I'll be the first one to say that my own leadership journey is still unfolding, right? Just like yours. And so I continue to try to study and to learn and to apply as best I can, both in the classroom, but also in the work that I do day to day, and even at home, a more transformational style of leadership. So the reason I bring that up is because in the course that this test drive has been drawn from, we are talking about the first rung of the ladder. We cover all of that we've discussed today and more in week 1. But you can see as we continue on through the 14 weeks of one of the courses that I teach at Woods, for example, we get into some much higher order concepts you can see in there around resident leadership or mindfulness or even self-acceptance and even self-transcendence. So we are not afraid, and we know we must climb the ladder if we're going to get to those heights of what's possible for us as leaders. So in terms of takeaways and next actions, we won't do this live, but I would love for you to think about one of the takeaways you have from our time together. Again, in 45 minutes, what we've tried to do is give you a sampling about our teaching methods, about the nature and the importance of the type of work that we do. But also in terms of next actions, I wanted to just give you that little jogger, just a little list there. You might see something in that that triggers a thought for you and says, maybe this is something I might like to do. So for example, that third bullet right there, track your energy patterns. I have come to discover that leaders are managers of energy as much as anything else. I'm doing a lot of work right now myself when it comes to my own energy profile. And when I can slot the tasks to match my energy and preserve my energy so I can show up at my best for others. So that's like a hot topic for me. That might be one of the ones that I would take as a next action. Really, really important. I'll give you one other quick example too. Name your emotions. A lot of times when we feel this something welling up inside of us, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But in some of our courses that work on emotional agility, we talk about creating healthy distance and recognizing you are not your thoughts and your emotions. And when you name them, all of a sudden and label them, it gives you a sort of a healthy separation to say, oh, I see. It's not that I'm angry, I'm experiencing anger, something like that. And all of a sudden it gives us just the amount of space we need to look more objectively and more in a grounded way at emotions that naturally arise whenever somebody comes with a color-coded spreadsheet and it's holiday season. You're like, what are you thinking? Like you can create some healthy distance there too. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm hoping for, is that being able to have some takeaways from our time together. And before I get us to dismissal here, I would just love to turn things over to Anna and just to tell us a few words here.
Thank you, Dr. Pepsel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I've seen a couple of you earlier this afternoon, but my name is Anna Hughes, and I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at Woods. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. A big thank you to Dr. Matt Pepsel for giving us a preview into the Self-Aware Leader, which is just one of the classes that make up the MS in Leadership. If you're looking to learn more about the program, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or my colleague, Carrie Johnson. I'll put in our email in just a little bit, but you'll also be getting an email from us with a copy of this recording. So thank you again, and I hope everybody has a really great evening.
Yeah, and I'll just say, pile on that too, and also just say thank you for making this investment in your leadership. However brief our time has been together today, I think the important concept of self-awareness and being able to understand that it is a continuous journey, it will constantly unfold for us. But when we demonstrate self-awareness, when we practice it, when we are as transparent as we're willing to be about our own journey in that way, then we make it safe for others to also go on their journey. And I feel that in terms of what our organizations need to come together to, yes, accomplish the mission, to use old military terms, but also to care for one another, to elevate one another, right? In times that are very challenging for a lot of different reasons, I feel like self-awareness is fundamental to making that happen. And so the more we can do to make those opportunities to reflect, sometimes that can be a walk in the woods, sometimes it could just be a drive home, a simple journaling practice, which I stink at. Maybe you're better at it. I hope you're better at it than I am. But whatever works for you, and knowing that that too will change over time, being able to commit yourself to this never-ending journey of leadership and the role of self-awareness within it, I think is one of the highest practices that we can have. Because if everyone could increase their self-awareness by even just a bit, I think we would not only see ourselves differently, we would see one another differently, and we would bring more of our full selves to the mission and ultimately make our organizations perform better, sure, but also to send our people home to their families, to their communities in that elevated state as well. So that's just some parting thoughts for you when it comes to self-awareness. But thank you again for making this investment in your leadership. Really appreciate you.
Well, thank you
Well,
all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. This has been an illuminating evening. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everybody found it a good investment of your time. So I thank you all for being with us this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, team. Enjoy
Thank you
your
very
evening.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good